You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. You probably saw this over the weekend. We learned on Saturday that LSU was going to be without Greg Brooks against Mississippi State. And then after the game on Saturday, as LSU was kind of publishing a lot of their social media, the pictures and the videos and all from the weekend, they showed a locker room video, and we'll play it for you here. It's Brian Kelly, just to set it up for you here. It starts with Brian Kelly pregame, talking about Greg Brooks, and then it cuts to a postgame locker room video where Brian Kelly's awarding Greg Brooks the game ball. Here, if you missed it, if you're watching, you'll see it. If you're listening, you'll hear it. It'll make sense. Here you go.
So show him what kind of team we have. Show him how we fight, how we play. Show him what kind of football team we have. Look, Greg Brooks, the game.
So at the end there, they're all yelling 3 and holding up 3 fingers for Greg Brooks, obviously number 3. So, sometimes when a player is absent and there's no extensive description or explanation for why that player is absent, sometimes you wonder, well, is it injury? Is it some off-the-field issue, whatever it may be? And a lot of times coaches just don't disclose those things. But it's pretty clear that when you see that, right, Brian Kelly getting his team to rally around Greg Brooks and then awarding him the game ball afterwards, that it's certainly nothing nefarious. I think we can all draw that conclusion. And then on Monday, we heard Brian Kelly say this about Greg Brooks.
Greg Brooks is out. Again, I don't have a lot that I can report on Greg. It is a family matter, so I am not going to speak on the family's behalf. If there's anything that I can get to you further after I speak with the family, we'll certainly give you information. But Greg is dealing with a medical emergency, and he will not be available.
So medical emergency, not available. When you hear medical emergency, that certainly speaks to the severity. And then Sam Pittman, of course, who coached Greg Brooks at Arkansas. Brooks is from Louisiana, who spent his first 3 years at Arkansas, and now last year and this year at LSU. Sam Pittman spoke at his weekly presser. He opened it by mentioning Greg Brooks.
I'm not positive what is going on with him. They talked about a medical emergency. Greg was a wonderful kid when he was here and did a great job for us. And whatever it may be, I want him and his family and LSU to know that we're concerned, we're praying for him, and we hope that he has whatever it may be, a speedy recovery.
And Sam Pittman, the little bit that I know Sam Pittman, you're having him on this show and getting to sort of interact a little bit like at SEC Media Days, just always strikes you as just a very genuinely good man, not let alone coach, whatever, just a good human being. So I have no doubt that comes from the most sincerest place possible. There's a couple of things about this story, and whenever we talk about things like this, there's always the sort of the two angles that you have to take. One is like the very real life part of it, and then there's the football part of it. And so the way I often describe this is, we have to kind of separate the two, where we all acknowledge very clearly that what's going on with Greg Brooks vastly supersedes anything related to football, and we want Greg Brooks to be healthy and to be safe and to recover and whatever is ailing him. And then there's also the football component of this. So I kind of want to talk about the football component, but I first want to say, like, with respect to the situation with Greg Brooks, I'm not very comfortable going into great detail. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what's happening, but for the same reason that Brian Kelly isn't comfortable coming forth and saying anything without the family doing that, I'm going to say the same. What I will say is I think you have to proceed this year as if you're not going to have Greg Brooks again for the rest of the season. And if at some point you get amazing news and his recovery goes just in spectacular fashion and you get him back, awesome. That would be a great thing for Greg and for the football team, obviously, but it would mean he's in a much healthier spot. But I think it's safe to say right now that if you're LSU, you have to proceed with the assumption you are not going to have Greg Brooks again this year. And some of what has been expressed to me is even more concerning than that. To say there's a real question as to whether he will be able to play ever again. So I sincerely hope that's not the case. And again, I'm trying to be very delicate because I don't want to speak out of turn here, and I don't want to go into any detail. But what I will remind you of is during fall camp, Greg Brooks did miss time with what was described then as bouts of vertigo. And when that's happening, you're talking about things that are neurological in nature. And there are very likely some commonalities with what was happening in fall camp causing that vertigo and what's led to this medical emergency here. And it's very real. So the most important part is to keep Greg in your prayers and for him and his family and the doctors and his recovery and all that stuff, because football is so ancillary and not even important when you're talking about something of this nature and seriousness. So would certainly hope and pray for Greg's safety and the absolute best outcome for him personally, athletically, just everything. So that's the very real life part of it. And as I often say, okay, now let's put that in a box, acknowledge it's there, put it on the shelf, acknowledge that it's there, and have a very separate conversation, which is if you're LSU football now, you have to proceed with a defense that your glaring weakness is your secondary. I think we'd all acknowledge that, yes. And by a mile, your best defensive back is Greg Brooks. He's your best guy. I'm not telling you he's your most physically gifted guy. He's a little undersized, and he's better served as a nickel than as a safety. But this is a guy that in his career now has played in 50 games with 45 starts. He can play nickel, he can play dime, he can play free, he can play strong, he can play box and help with the run. Greg Brooks is your best defensive back in a secondary that wasn't very good the first 2 weeks, and now you don't have the guy that was your best player. So how do you manage that going forward? Brian Kelly on Monday did allude to the fact that they feel like now they have more than 11. And what he was sort of saying is that he and Matt House have had to sort of trust some other guys to create rotations. And you saw that a lot against Mississippi State. And as a matter of fact, he talked about having, growing trust in some of the young players on defense.
Whit Weeks, we knew what we had. We had a young player, certainly a true freshman, but he can run all over the field. He's extremely athletic. I think you get a little concerned when you play a lot of true freshmen, certainly in the back end of your defense. Ryan Yates came in and played really well. He was clean. He was disciplined in his alignments. He was assignment correct. But, you got 3 true freshmen on the field. On the road in the SEC, I don't think you're running around going, oh, this is great. But we had confidence in them that they could go out and play well.
One more, and he's right. You were playing a lot of true freshmen running out there. And at some point throughout the year, those guys don't play like freshmen anymore. But they wouldn't be on the field if they weren't your best option now. And the combination that you saw on Saturday against Mississippi State looked pretty good. And look, there's another part of this, which is recruiting and what it means on the recruiting trail when you can show a path to the field for young players.
We're recruiting young men that believe and have confidence in themselves that they can play right away. And certainly there are other factors that they consider now in making decisions on where to go, looking at the depth chart and looking at, well, can this help my, NIL? I mean, there are other factors now involved in that. So what we can tell them, and this is what I tell them all the time, I'm not afraid to play freshmen, but I'm going to play the best players. And if that is a freshman, I'm playing a freshman. If that's a graduate transfer, I'll play a graduate transfer. And I think our track record shows that the best players are going to play. And if you're a freshman and you can handle it mentally and physically, we'll put you on the field.
He mentioned Ryan Yates. And we saw Ryan Yates as a true freshman out there playing an awful lot with Greg Brooks not out there. Not only did we see nickel, 5 defensive backs, we saw a lot of dime against Mississippi State, 6 defensive backs. So where are you getting all these bodies, especially without Greg Brooks? Well, we saw Andre Sam. Again, when Brian Kelly said we'll play transfers, we'll play true freshmen. Andre Sam has played in 48 career college football games with 41 career starts. Major Burns, who's been at LSU for 3 years after his year at Georgia, but he's had a lot of injuries. So he's now in his 4th year of college football. 17 games played with 13 starts. That number would be much higher but for his injuries. And I think you're figuring out where Major Burns is really good. He's much better coming downhill in the box, helping with the run, than he is in coverage, whereas Ryan Yates is more advanced in coverage. So what you saw on Saturday is kind of an evolution and development of where you play these guys and who you trust where. So this is a nice blend of a veteran like Andre Sam, a veteran like Major Burns, and young guys like Ryan Yates stepping in. I'll remind you, you still got Sage Ryan, who they've played at nickel. They've tried to play it free. They played it outside corner. He's a really physically gifted guy, but finding his home is kind of the key right now. But you've got Andre Sam, you've got Major Burns, you've got Sage Ryan, and then you have this glut of young players. We saw Ryan Yates. We saw Javian Toviano get on the field. Remember, Javian Toviano, before the season started, was on the Sean Alexander Award watch list, which goes to the best true freshman in college football. And that's a guy who Brian Kelly said, look, there may be a point where we redshirt him because we're not going to put him on the field if he's not ready. Out of necessity, you may have to put him on the field now because of the situation with Greg Brooks. And then there's Jordan Allen as well. There was a point in fall camp where Jordan Allen bumped up and was running with the 2s. So that's a second-year guy who may, out of necessity, be pushed onto the field. When they're out there, then it's just a matter of making plays. And sometimes it's premature from what you'd like, but the situation necessitates it. I know I've shared this with you before, but it's the Greedy Williams story. Greedy was not good enough to get on the field as a true freshman. He redshirted at a time when nobody at LSU was redshirting because it was the whole mentality was 3 years into the league, and especially at DBU. So he redshirts in 2016. In 2017, you have an injury, you have a suspension to Christian Fulton, and just like that, you're opening up in New Orleans against BYU, and Greedy's got to start. He gets an interception in the opener. He had an interception like the first 3 games. Was an All-American, never left the field. So sometimes it's just that opportunity has to come, and you have to go fly around on the field and make plays when that opportunity comes. And for some of these younger guys, that opportunity is now. And unfortunately, it's in a secondary where you're still finding your sea legs and what your best position groups are. But if there is something that should give you solace with this LSU secondary, it's look at what's happened with the linebacker core in a relatively short amount of time. That's Matt House's position group. But whereas week 1, you were starting Omar Spates and Harold Perkins at off-ball linebacker, and you very quickly had to adjust. And now we know, Brian Kelly said it, Greg Penn is your centerpiece. And the rotations will come off of Greg Penn. And so you have Penn, and you'll have Spates, and you love Witt Weeks. Obviously, you have West Weeks there as well, a freshman in Christian Braithwaite that allows you to freelance with Harold Perkins. You figured it out. And I trust this coaching staff to do the same in the secondary to get their best 4, 5, or 6 defensive backs on the field, given the guys they have. Look, you're playing at LSU for a reason. You got a scholarship to LSU because you're a really good player. So go play really well when you get your opportunity. The best news for LSU, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Auburn, Army, all manageable games, all winnable games where you're going to be a big favorite before your open date and you go to Alabama. And by that time, everyone on this team should be veteran. So our prayers and our concerns certainly with Greg Brooks. how LSU continues to move forward. Without him, we're starting to see that manifest. We started to see it this past weekend with good results. That's an evolution that'll continue with Arkansas coming to Baton Rouge this weekend. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.